My name is Zoya. I'm 27. I never believed my own parents could lie about something so cruel until the night everything fell apart. 3 days before my grandpa died, I got a message from a neighbor saying he had been admitted to the hospital. That alone felt strange because my grandpa and I talked almost every day, and no one in my family had told me anything. I tried calling my mom first, but she ignored the call. My dad answered once and sounded irritated, like I had disturbed him. He told me Grandpa was fine and that the doctors didn't want visitors. Something in his voice felt wrong, but I didn't push it because my parents had always been controlling about family matters. The next day I called again, and again my dad insisted there was nothing to worry about. I even asked directly if Grandpa had asked for me, and he said no, that Grandpa was too weak to talk. That answer didn't sit right with me, because my grandpa was the strongest person I knew. Stubborn in the best way, the kind of man who would insist on speaking even if he could barely breathe. By the third day, my anxiety had grown into something I couldn't ignore. So I decided to go to the hospital anyway. I drove there after work with my heart pounding the entire time. The hospital corridors smelled like disinfectant and silence. And when I asked at the front desk, the nurse confirmed my grandpa was still there. That's when things started to feel even stranger. As soon as I stepped toward his room, I saw my dad standing outside the door like a guard. His expression hardened the moment he saw me. He stepped forward quickly and blocked the doorway with his body. I still remember the exact moment because it felt like my world tilted sideways. In my head, the words echoed like they belonged on some dramatic headline. My dying grandpa called only me to the hospital. That was exactly what the neighbor had told me earlier, and suddenly it made terrifying sense. But before I could speak, my dad said something that made my stomach drop. Dad tried to stop me at the door and said, "He doesn't want to see you." Hearing that sentence felt like someone punched the air out of my lungs. My grandpa had practically raised me. I spent summers at his house, helped him in the garden, listened to his endless stories about his youth. There was no way he suddenly didn't want to see me, especially when he was dying. I tried to move past my dad, but he stepped closer and lowered his voice, telling me to go home and stop causing drama. For a second, I almost believed him, because that's what years of manipulation does to you. But then something unexpected happened. A nurse who had been standing at the end of the hallway walked toward us quickly, her eyes darting between me and my father. My dad looked irritated and stepped aside just enough to let her pass. As she reached me, she gently grabbed my arm and pulled me a few steps away from him, toward a quiet side corridor. My heart was racing so fast I could barely think. Then she leaned closer and whispered something that shattered everything my father had just said. The moment replayed in my mind exactly like bold text flashing across a screen. A nurse pulled me through a side entrance, whispered, "He has been asking for you for 3 days, but your father blocked every call." For a second, I thought I misheard her. I stared at her face, waiting for her to laugh or correct herself. But she didn't. Her expression was serious, almost sympathetic. She told me that my grandpa had been repeatedly asking for me, and had tried to call me several times. Each time, my father had told the staff he would handle it. My chest tightened with a mix of anger and confusion I couldn't even process. Why would my parents lie about something like that? Why would they keep me away from him when he was literally asking for me? The nurse looked back toward the hallway, where my father was still standing, and then turned to me again. Her voice dropped even lower. "He told me to give you this." She placed a small sealed envelope into my shaking hands. The weight of it felt heavier than paper should. My heart pounded so loudly it echoed in my ears as I stared down at it, realizing that whatever was inside might explain everything my parents had tried so hard to hide. And in that moment, I felt a cold wave of fear because I somehow knew that opening that envelope was going to change my life forever. I stood there in that quiet hospital corridor staring at the envelope in my hands, my fingers trembling so badly I could barely hold it. The nurse watched me for a moment, and then said softly that my grandpa had insisted it reach me personally. She told me he had been asking for me nonstop, growing weaker each day while my father kept telling the staff I had refused to come. Hearing that felt like my chest was being squeezed from the inside. My parents had told my dying grandpa I didn't want him. The thought made my stomach twist with anger and disbelief. I slowly opened the envelope, expecting maybe a letter or some kind of note. Instead, a small flash drive slid into my palm. The nurse explained quietly that my grandpa had recorded something on his phone and asked her to copy it because he was afraid it might disappear. My heart started pounding again. I asked if he was awake, but she shook her head sadly and said he had slipped into sleep not long ago. That meant whatever he wanted to tell me was on that drive. I rushed to the hospital waiting area, where there was a public computer, and plugged it in, my hands still shaking. The video file appeared on the screen, and I hesitated for a second before clicking play. The screen lit up with the image of my grandpa lying in his hospital bed, looking weaker than I had ever seen him. Tubes ran across his chest, and his voice sounded thin, but his eyes were still sharp. The moment I saw him like that, tears blurred my vision. He started speaking slowly, as if every word cost him strength. He said my name first. "Zoya, if you're watching this, it means they finally gave this to you." Hearing that sentence sent chills through me. Then he explained everything. He said he had been trying to call me for days, but every time he asked my parents to contact me, they told him I didn't care enough to come. My heart felt like it shattered hearing that lie repeated out loud. He paused to breathe and then continued, saying he knew that wasn't true because I had always been the one who showed up when he needed someone. He said he had started to suspect something was wrong when my parents kept making excuses about why I wasn't visiting. Then he revealed the reason they didn't want me there. According to him, weeks before he got sick, he had changed his will. Instead of dividing everything equally between the family like he originally planned, he had decided to leave his house and most of his savings to me, not because I asked for it, but because I was the only one who had cared about him, without expecting anything back. When my parents found out, they were furious. He said they tried to convince him to change it again, and when he refused, they began telling everyone I was selfish and didn't love him anymore. Hearing that felt unreal, like someone else's story. But the worst part came next. My grandpa looked directly into the camera and said, "If they kept you away from me, it's because they hoped I'd believe their lies before I died." Tears were running down my face at that point. I could barely breathe. The video ended with him saying he loved me, and that he was proud of the person I had become. When the screen went dark, I sat there frozen, trying to process everything. That was the moment the line from the story replayed in my head like thunder. What he gave me made me faint, because it wasn't just the inheritance that shook me, it was the truth about my parents. A few minutes later, the nurse came to find me and gently told me my grandpa had just passed away. I felt like the ground disappeared under my feet. But before I left the hospital that night, I did something my parents never expected. I went straight to the hospital office and asked for a copy of the security footage showing my father blocking me from entering earlier. Then I contacted the lawyer my grandpa mentioned in the video. Within weeks, the truth came out in front of the entire family. My parents' lies were exposed, the will was confirmed, and everyone finally understood why they had tried so desperately to keep me away from him. But none of that mattered as much as the one thing I lost, the chance to talk to my grandpa. One last time. Even now I replay that video sometimes just to hear his voice again. And every time I do, I remind myself that the truth always finds a way to come out, no matter how hard someone tries to bury it. If this story moved you or reminded you how important honesty and family truly are, make sure you subscribe to the channel so you don't miss more powerful stories like this.